bottom. Annie Power at the last race down. Annie Power has gone but in front of the last length. Melanie Light by the first time. They're running up towards the finish, and he's mistaken the winning post. He's mistaken the winning post completely. Roger Lockwood and Hoyt.
From Archibald, Hardy used to defend his title, but Archibald is flattened out in second. Then in third, now White Boy is beginning to power. He's drifting off the true line. He's fire, and this was coming home. Shoulders are going to win his fourth Betfair chase, and Cordo Star is still the king. Cordo Star wins.
All right, hello, and welcome to another episode of Tailed Off. This is a No Holds Barred podcast that dives headfirst into the wonderfully weird world of horse racing. And today we're joined by a very special guest. He grew up in the lovely cathedral city of Hereford, joined as a trainee clerk back in 2021 at the course scheme at the Arena Racing Company. Worked on many courses across the UK, Newcastle, Southall, amongst many, and he became the youngest clerk in Windsor and now currently works at Windsor Racecourse. Charlie Rees, welcome to the pod. Lovely to have you. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Merry Christmas to you all, and thanks for having me on.
And you
yes,
too,
Merry Christmas. You just reminded me it is Christmas. I'm a bit behind.
Haven't bought any gifts for anyone yet.
Christmas shopping. So we'll dive into some questions, shall we, Charlie? I mean, I was saying to Elle and Duncan, I know nothing about what it means to be a clerk, a racecourse. So I'm quite intrigued to understand a bit more. So maybe Elle, should we start with you?
Yeah, so we wanted to dive into your background as well, Charlie, in terms of how you got into the game and sort of like your progression throughout horse racing. But I think for a lot of our listeners, we try and bring a wider audience into horse racing and help hopefully debunk some of the language and jargon that is often flying about and can be quite confusing. And I think one of the strangest terms we have in sort of the career side of horse racing is clerk of the course. So just very simply, what is a clerk of the course and what are they responsible for?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a very niche role. So the clerk of the course sort of oversees the racing department of the racecourse, I suppose. So we do everything from work closely with the BHA to design a race program for the race course, and then we also manage a team which look after the grounds and provide the racing surface. And then probably what we're most known for is sort of giving the going on the day, and then with that sort of liaison for the race course between sort of for the race course to the stakeholders, so be it the jockeys, trainers, owners, stable staff on a race day, and sort of the lead up to it, just to make sure that everyone's sort of happy and everything's where it should be.
Yeah, I think because that's one of the, I suppose, confusing things sometimes is that people just see you almost as like a groundsman if we're like related to another sport like football or something. But it's clearly you have people doing the actual groundwork, if that makes sense. And actually your job is much, much broader than just putting a stick in the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, like Windsor, for instance, we've got a team of 6 full-time staff, and then we have about 15 part-time staff that sort of work on the grounds sort of 3 days a week. So there's a team of sort of around 20 ground staff quite a lot of the year round. I like to get my hands dirty. I think as a clerk, it's quite hard to give an opinion unless you're sort of really in there and feeling it yourself. And, I enjoy that side of the role. Yeah, obviously a lot of our jobs probably office-based. So 60% of our time's office-based, and then sort of 40% outside, sort of making sure the race course itself. And even the wider grounds, Windsor, as you know, has got a lot of gardens and a lot of outdoor space, and even things like the car parks, it's just making sure that the sort of whole customer experience is there for everyone, be it, like I say, the stakeholders or annual members or just people coming for first time racing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go on, Matt, I think you could ask something.
Yeah, I just had a question about, we might get onto this a bit later, but you said you're most known for giving sort of the going of the course. Must be quite a challenge to get that right. And do you get any sort of feedback on whether that is right or not for the day? And sort of in terms of how the team deal with that, and I don't know if it's a bit of a learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, going's the opinion of the clerk. And you put that out onto the going reports, and that sort of determines what horses come and race, because obviously some horses won't want to come if it's quick, and some will want to come if it's quick. But look, it's something you definitely develop over time, and every race course is different because different soil structures, different sort of, even grass species can slightly make a difference, I suppose. Yeah, there is a lot of pressure on it. You've obviously got to back your own judgment, but, through time, you understand what the jockeys are feeling as well. I've got a very good rapport with a number of the jockeys because I do see them an awful lot racing every week at Windsor, and you kind of know what they think it's going to feel like when they're riding, even though you're walking it. And you try and use as much knowledge as possible to provide as accurate sort of going description as possible.
Very nice. So it's a bit more of a joint exercise. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Charlie, just out of interest, what is the kind of the science behind how you read it? Because you see like the going stick, as they call it, but how do you actually measure how it's done? Is it as simple as just sticking? Has it got like a stick with measurements on there, or kind of numbers and things? You stick it in the ground, see how far it goes in, and say, is that right?
So there are two sort of official ways as far as the BHA are concerned. Is one's on feel, so it's all on the clerk's feel and how we feel the ground. So literally a walking stick into the ground, and obviously your course, and it's not so much how far the stick goes into the ground, it's more sort of how much resistance there is on the ground, especially in the summer, because, I'm sure, Duncan, you can probably push in a stick a lot further than myself by just being stronger than me.
Charlie.
No, just being stronger than me. So it's more on feel. And then also we've got the going stick, which will be the number that sits next to the going description. And that's a electronic device. Turf Tracks have designed it, and it goes into the ground and it measures the resistance to penetrate the soils. And then when you get it in, you pull it back to 45 degrees, which again measures the resistance of the shear movement, so the movement coming back 45 degrees, which then simulates the hoof hitting the surface and then rotating. So that gives you a number from 0 to 15. But there are other, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, because I think another confusing thing for sort of new racegoers is that going stick reading. So just help us understand what the scale is from 0 to 15, how that works.
Yeah, so 15 would be like 25 effectively, and then 0 would be like the beach, just sand, like no resistance at all, goes in and then straight back. So most readings you'll see in Britain pretty much are between sort of, in the winter you might get a 3, but you're sort of looking anything from 3 to high 9. Obviously, most racecourses in the UK can water, so you don't see those extremes. Whereas in Australia and places where they do also use it, you see sort of 10s, 11s, 12s on proper firm, quick surfaces. But then obviously that's what they're used to, and that's what they kind of want to provide.
Because that's one thing that's actually, even as I would say, is quite an experienced racegoer or an anorak, as some of my mates would call me. Even I would look at, so going to Windsor every Monday and looking at, in the height of the summer, generally good to firm, you probably have to water. And it boggles my mind that the height of the firmness can be 15, albeit, okay, you just said, you just explained it doesn't generally get into double figures. But like a good to firm reading can be something like, keep me honest here, something like 6.9 or sort of around 7. And it feels to me, hang on, if good to firm is halfway on the scale, that almost doesn't really logically make sense. So maybe you can help me understand that a bit.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So there's probably two factors to that. Is firstly, that reading's taken at 6 o'clock in the morning, and our first race might not be till 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So the ground will have dried out considerably. Well, not considerably, but will have improved throughout the day because it's not being watered on a race day. So that's one of the reasons. So that scale is, 6.9 at 6 o'clock in the morning is telling me that with the weather coming up, that it will be good to firm later in the race day with all the information I have on hand. Because otherwise, I'd be changing the going sort of 5 times in a race day. We can change that much in a race day, and you'd just be constantly changing it and just annoying everyone effectively. And then also, I suppose, because normally the ground is freshly watered in the summer, that makes a big difference because you don't get, so when you water loads of ground, you don't get very good root structure because basically the roots have always got water coming from above, so they don't ever have to go down and sort of find water deep in the surface. And because you water so much in the summer to keep sort of safe ground, then you don't ever really have much resistance because the majority of resistance is the root structure. So your shear readings are quite low. So your penetration still might be quite high, hence the fact that it's sort of going to feel quick when they're riding on it. But the resistance is really low, which obviously brings your number down.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You must know a lot about grass. You must have the best lawn out of everyone.
It's quite funny, actually. So I did get a bit nerdy into my lawn sort of last summer and the start of this year, and then it just got so dry, I just thought, actually, hell with it. I've got enough bloody grass to look after at the racecourse. I don't need to worry about it here. it gets a bit
Yeah,
sad,
race
doesn't
course,
it?
Charlie. Just go and dig up the racecourse, Charlie, and put it in your garden. Job done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, take it home with me.
Exactly.
I don't know, and just to keep on the theme of the going stick, I don't know, and you might not want to comment on it, but I don't know if you saw Clerk of the Course, and I think he's the chief executive of Thirsk Racecourse, James Sanderson, recently was fined for, and that was actually for appearing on a podcast, so that's not a bad omen, but he was quite, let's say, open and transparent while being interviewed at the races by another podcast about the strength and reliability of the going stick. And to paraphrase, he essentially said that he just has the reading, but then will adjust it to what he thinks. And as you say, you've got a bit of license to go on feel. But I just don't know if you saw that in the news recently and what you make of that. If maybe he was unfairly treated for that.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, and obviously everyone's open to their own opinion. I download all my readings, so they're there for anyone to go and see. So I can't make up a reading, and I think it's really interesting because it actually produces a map. And I think this is something that racing needs to improve on, is we need to get us more information to the punters. You look at Hong Kong and places like that, the punters have basically a newspaper for a race card, and it's got everything from track conditions to the size of the horse's hoof that they're trying to have a bet on. And I think the information that Turf Tracks provides is so interesting. It produces a map which they turn the numbers into colours, so it's really easy for everyone to see, and it shows you where's quicker on the track, where's not. So, draw biases and stuff that we all talk about so much. And you look at Ascot and they'll do the 3 readings, like far side, stand side, and down the centre, and that sort of does always add up really where the pace is in the race. But look, I think the Turf Tracks is a step in the right direction, the going stick, and I think it is being developed, and what they're looking to do is add a soil moisture reading to it as well, just to get a bit more data. And I think racing needs to catch up with other sports. You look at what they're doing in football, and golf's just phenomenal when you watch the Ryder Cup and stuff, and the greens and stuff. They're absolutely epic. I think racing is getting there, but using technologies and sort of sharing data can only be a benefit for everyone. It's definitely a benefit for us, the clerks and the groundsmen, because you've got sort of loads and loads of data on your own surface, but also it's got to be help you guys have a better day at the races, because you know a bit more, and as easy as we can, sort of more people we can share it with, the more people then we can explain it to, and then hopefully the easier it is for people to understand our sport, which might seem slightly intimidating from the outside.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. I just got a couple more questions on, I suppose, the theme of being a clerk of the course, and I'll hand over to Duncan. So I suppose thinking about race day in a second, but just outside of a race day, and you kind of alluded to it a bit earlier, kind of what is your, average week as being a clerk of the course? You said sort of actually it's more office based than perhaps I would have given it credit for, but what are you doing on a day-to-day outside of the actual race day itself? Yeah,
so Windsor's very unique in the way that for the whole summer I'm pretty much racing every single week. And so I'm always in a stage of either entries or declarations. But if you take now, for example, I haven't actually got anything going on this week as far as racing's concerned. So I'm sort of liaising with the head groundsman and the grounds team to sort of make sure that we are preparing and getting as close and ready for jumping on January the 1st, which is our next fixture, be it fence repairs, hurdle repairs, moving rail, etc. And so that's sort of the outside job. But on the inside, so we're constantly working sort of 3 months ahead on doing the races. So the program books for races come out quarterly, and we're constantly basically looking to see which races will work using all different sort of data, be it field sizes, betting turnover, and then obviously looking at what else is going on in the country. Because at the end of the day, I want as many runners at Windsor, and I'm quite selfish about trying to get as many and trying to keep as much sort of attractive racing at Windsor as possible. So that takes up a lot of time, and it's part of the job that I find fascinating. And I think it's one of those, the more you put in, the more you get out. And then there's also just general sort of queries. And for instance, this week we're sort of doing some stuff for the Berkshire Winter Millions, and it's sort of thinking sort of what can we do to try and make it as good a customer experience by maybe bringing in some sort of racehorses or some ponies for kids to ride and stuff. So I've got to sort of oversee all of that, because you've got to work with the BHA. But I make my job sound very, very boring, because there's just so many things I can't really pin down exactly what I do. It's very, very broad.
Sounds fascinating to me.
Yeah, it sounds quite varied, to be fair.
Yeah.
But probably way more varied than I think people would give it credit for. I think people just think it's an
100%.
obsession about the going, but it's way more than that.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
no-
what I thought. I was just thinking it was all going related stuff. I had no idea, like decks and kind of the actual sorting out,
Program.
the quarterly kind of program for everything. Like it's unbelievable.
Just out of interest on the program, because I suppose the fixtures are set in the year coming, aren't they? In sort of like, say, the autumn time. Are you saying within that you have scope to change what actual races you put on?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, actually, for half day, I was working on PB2. So that's basically Windsor's first fixtures until halfway through June. So yeah, we also work quite hard on the fixture list, because that's sort of like a toing and froing process where you basically say, I want these fixtures next year, and then another race course, and then it's sort of who gets them, and you swap race meetings around, and then hopefully everyone's happy across the country. But yeah, like today we were designing Windsor Sprint Series and stuff, just seeing how we could sort of elevate that to, if I moved a Class 2 to another Monday, would it be better than running it sort of the Monday of Royal Ascot? Well, the answer is probably yes, because they're going to run at Ascot and not at Windsor. So yeah, it takes a lot of time, because competition's probably as hard as anything at the moment, with the sort of number of runners that everyone's getting. Horses can't run 3-4 days in a row, so you've got to think about that and be realistic that they're probably going to run for more prize money or at a bigger day if they get the opportunity to.
Yeah.
When you kind of come to those discussions with other race courses about when you're going to kind of put in your fixtures and things, do you ever kind of have a falling out with any of the other clerks and
That's
things
what
like
I was
that?
thinking as
I
well.
want this, I want that. You kind of bidding war almost for like, I want this, I want that. Like, how is it decided who's going to get, if you wanted the Monday night of X, whatever day it was, and someone else has come in and said, well, I want that, who kind of gets the kind of the go ahead? Is it kind of first come, first served?
So it's quite old fashioned, and it's probably one of the reasons why the fixture list gets so criticised in Britain, and everyone says, oh, why can't we be like Australia? Why can't? But it's because Britain's racing is so old. The race courses own quite a lot of the fixtures. Yeah. So we'd own 25 of our fixtures at Windsor, and we have 26 fixtures. And then that one fixture we don't own is owned by the BHA. And to get that fixture each year, we have to put in a bid about how much prize money we can put up. And they'll look at that as one of the factors, and then also sort of put everyone together that's put into a bid and basically think this is the best outcome for British racing to run it at Windsor, because one of the factors will be geographical as well. So they won't want to run us on the same day as Ascot, for instance, because that's just not good for anyone. But yeah, beauty of working at Windsor, I suppose, is that because we're part of Arena Racing Company, which owns 16 racecourses, all of the fixtures that are owned within Arena Racing Company can be moved around pretty seamlessly, in the way that I could swap a fixture with Lingfield and I'm not going to upset anyone, because it's staying within the group. It gets a bit more tricky when you're trying to sort of work with someone else to do a racecourse on racecourse swap, because they might not want to swap it, but you might want it, and that's when the BHA fixtures are really crucial. New Year's Day, for instance, and Boxing Day, there'll be a lot of fixtures for high value, and that's because they're probably BHA fixtures.
God, it seems very, like you say, Charlie, it seems quite old-fashioned in terms of how it's done. It's sort of like you got some sort of historic reasons why they're there, but then you're sort of trying to bargain, aren't you, with people in terms of what races are racing at yours. So it's quite interesting, actually. I had no idea.
Yeah,
sorry, Charlie, carry on.
I was just going to say, we're very fortunate. We've got a race planning team at Arena Racing Company who are, they're doing that 24/7. So I basically have meetings with them. We sit down, and I'm quite lucky. I then get to scurry off, and they get the hard discussions with
they got to
upsetting people, and and with the BHA. But the BHA have got a really helpful race planning team as well, which there's so many people sort of behind the scenes that no one ever sees that do such a fantastic job. So it does make it a lot easier than it sounds. We're not just on our own.
Yeah, amazing.
Charlie, what I was just going to ask there is, in terms of in terms of the actual, the way that the fixture list and everything, like the process is structured currently, what would you change, if you could, with how it's currently set up to potentially improve it?
Yeah, that's the big question. Yeah, think about cricket and play the straight bat. No,
yeah, exactly. No run.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably there probably currently is too much racing for the amount of horses that are in training, but that doesn't mean that there will it'd be a shame to sort of start to see fixtures go and then potentially racecourses struggle. So it's a real fine balance. I think everyone sort of is getting to the point where everyone now just sort of accepts that it's going to be a tough few years, especially with everything that's gone on with the gambling tax, and that we just sort of all have to stand strong and get through it, and things will get better. I think there probably are a few changes that could be made to sort of strengthen it, potentially just, I do think the flat season flows really well as far as those top class horses. They're sort of every 3 weeks, there's a really nice slot for them to fall into, start with York and then Ascot and then Goodwood and York again, and it just really flows really nice. And I think sort of the jumps racing model is getting there, and I'm quite pleased to say I think Berkshire Winter Millions is kind of helping with that. It's sort of making the stepping stones of a really good season for the top quality horses, but obviously not every horse falls into those fixtures, which means there's a lot to sort of go on beneath.
Yeah,
I appreciate your answer to that, Charlie.
And then I suppose in terms of your bread and butter on the race day, then talk us through a typical race day for yourself, and at what time do you get to the course, for example, and kind of what stuff are you doing throughout the day and / evening on a Monday night?
Yeah, so race days tend to be quite a long day at Windsor because we do race most time in the evenings. Get to the course at about 5:45 in the morning. First thing I'd probably do is ring the forecaster, and we've got a sort of professional forecaster that we speak to, and then obviously just apps like you guys would probably look at all the time if you're going racing, and sort of make up your mind on exactly what the weather's going to do for that day. And then we've also got a weather system, so I'd look at that, see if there had been any rain, exactly how much, or how much evapotranspiration, so that's how much moisture we lost out of the ground overnight. So that might make me think that I might have to water on a race day, but I'm not very pro watering on a race day myself. And then we go and walk the course with the head groundsman, and that's when we produce the first going update of the day. So head groundsman goes around with the turf going stick, as we discussed earlier, and I walk with the stick. And that's sort of the first walk round of the day to sort of check everything's in place. Be it the rails and everything, and you're happy there aren't any sort of, animal scratchings or anything that could potentially cause a problem on the surface of the track. And then I probably get quite a lot of phone calls around that sort of 7:30. It's always a bit of a competition as to which trainer gets in touch with you first, to be honest. And then we update the going, and then it's just setting up for a race day. Go down the stables, make sure everything's cushy down there, and into the weighing room, and make sure everything's fine for when the jocks all arrive, and maybe go and check everything's all right, and the owners and trainers, and then just race day prep. So we get through like full lists. For instance, number 4 in the 5th race is a kicker. Number 5 is weighing cheek pieces. And just literally put down as much information as possible to help me, so I know. I can basically pre-warn anyone, be it an owner stood next to a bit close to a horse, just sir, please stand back, that horse actually does kick, sort of thing, or groundsmen or stall handlers, that's a big one for kickers. And then 2 hours before the first race, we walk the course again with the independent steward that sits in the steward's room, the steward's panel chair, and that's sort of for them to, one, sort of agree that your going description is accurate for what the surface is, and also to have a final look at the track. And then half an hour before the track, do a race day briefing with all of the medical, veterinary teams and everyone that sort of works for us on a race day and groundsman, and then get into racing, which, as you sort of said, there can be 6 o'clock first race sometimes. So you've already sort of done best part of 12 hours, if not more, before you almost start your job for the day, which can go on till 10 o'clock at night. They're long enough days.
That's a long day. What actually, so that's all the prep, and what happens when the races are on? If you've got kind of a routine between races and then during the race itself that you do?
Yeah, so predominantly before every race we in the parade ring, just check every horse is wearing the correct headgear, because obviously if they get down to post wearing the wrong headgear, they can be a non-runner, and that's not good for anyone. And just make sure that everything's sort of behaving and running as smoothly as possible. And then we watch the races from the sort side-on box, so it's basically just a little box up in the grandstand that's overlooking the finish line, and it's a pretty good view of the whole track. And we have a split screen with 4 angles of the racing on there, so you can pretty much always see the race from 4 angles, which is really, really helpful. And then obviously you've got your own eyes, and I watch that with the stewards. And then as long as everything goes well, straight back down, probably get feedback from the jockeys, check they're happy with the track, and if there's anything, one of them might drop the whip or whatever, because that's obviously got to get it back to them. Yeah, and then just sort of, as long as everything's running smoothly, sort of just repeat that sort of process really, and check in with the stewards, maybe watch a bit just to see, watch it in slow-mo or whatever, if you think there might have been something that you want to take second eye at. Yeah, and every race day varies because obviously we're working with animals at the end of the day and anything can happen. That's not the jockeys, that's the horses. So we'll just sort of see what happens.
I just had
A couple of bets as well in between races.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
We're not allowed to bet.
Probably not allowed. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it'd be rather frowned on, I'd say, but I generally wouldn't have any interest on a race day. So focused on the job, but it'd be the last thing that goes through my mind.
Going on with that one again. Bet on
Don't
a
add
horse.
those emotions as well. You mentioned obviously that you've got the split screen you're watching, obviously for conditions of the course and things like that. Do you ever go back, so especially when there's jumps? Obviously, we saw was it like 2 weekends ago with New Lion and Constitution Hill, and there's been a bit of chat about the fences and everything. Like, do you ever go back and sort of, if you see a faller, for example, are you going back to sort of not criticise but check what's happening? Is that something that was the course or the horse? Like, do you ever go back and review that?
Yeah, so I'm a bit sad, and I think a lot of clerks would sit in this boat. It's very hard for me to watch racing like I used to watch racing.
Yeah.
Things will catch my eye, and I generally can't watch racing on telly now without sort of looking at anything but the winner, because that's what you're sort of programmed to do as a clerk. But as far as sort of assessing Windsor, I'd watch every single race back, and I'll watch them all back on a Tuesday whilst entries are coming in. And even now, like today, I was watching racing from Windsor to see sort of where did we exactly have the hurdles last January, so that I can sort of plan where did it work, how could I make it better, sort of thing. But I wouldn't really worry too much about, I wouldn't be one to criticise anyone else and what they're doing at their course, because I fully understand the challenges that we all face.
If you had a couple of fallers, let's say at the same hurdle, like would you start thinking, oh, there might be a problem with that hurdle, or would you just sort of just put it down to horse racing,
No, absolutely. For instance, if something on a race day came up, you'd probably go and inspect it at that point. Not necessarily an official inspection, but it might just be the fact that I jump in a truck and just go up with the groundsman, just have a look, more for my own peace of mind.
Yeah.
But obviously there are the official sort of inspections that you can do with the jockeys, and maybe take a trainer up there if something arises pretty bad. But if it was just, let's say, you had a faller at third last fence for nearly every fixture of the year, so it didn't stand out blaringly obvious on that day, but over the course of a whole season it sort of added up, then you'd probably be looking to see how can we improve this fence. And that's probably something as well in the off season a lot of courses would be doing, and that's trying to sort of develop your race course.
Yeah.
By sort of maybe moving something forwards, pulling it back, or making it smaller, whatever, changing the shape of it, whatever that is.
They out of interest in terms of putting in obstacles, and we'll come on to the return of jumps at Windsor in a bit. How much sort of freedom do you get to sort of, let's say you've got a map of the course and between hurdles and fences, are there kind of certain criteria in terms of minimum numbers, or can you just sort of plot them where you want within reason?
Yeah, so you have to have a certain amount of fences per mile, and same for the hurdles. And then you also have to have them, so for instance, you can't have a open ditch as the first fence, so it has to be a plain fence. So that sort of, by the time you've got 4 or 5 starts, that pretty much dictates where everything sits on the course. I mean, Windsor's quite unique in the way that obviously we basically redesigned a race course, so I'm very grateful I got the opportunity to do that, whereas most people have just inherited it, and the jumps are where they are, and that's where they'll probably always be, because it works. But look, we work closely, so the course inspectors, so Wayne Hutchinson, obviously ex-jockey, rode Smad Place and lots of other good horses. I work exceedingly close with him, so he comes and inspects at the start of every season to check that we're sort of compliant with the BHA's rules. And then throughout the season, he'll come and do spot checks, and if I ever need him, he's on the end of the phone or comes in to visit. And yeah, like hurdle positions, you've got a bit more freedom, because obviously you tend to have less hurdles in a circuit than you do chase fences. So we've only got 6 at Windsor as opposed to 9 fences. So you always want to be moving them forwards or back, left and right, to provide the best ground, because obviously get them off the running line and sort of provide fresh ground. But also, you don't want to be putting them too close to a bend or too close off a bend, or running downhill or whatever. You're always got to think where would this sort of jump best, and where would the jockeys want it to be, and where would everyone want it to be. So yeah, there is flexibility, but within the rules.
Right. If everyone's happy, I was going to say the next bit, Charlie, we've talked a lot about, I guess, day in the life of Clerk on the course, but in terms of your background and journey, so obviously you've clearly got a lot of passion for what you do, but where did that kind of passion for racing develop from, really?
Yeah, so I've always been going racing all of my life, and my family have had interests in horses, but yeah, all the time really, from my grandfather and then now my father. And I, as probably most people did, I thought I'd be sort of A.T. McCoy when I grow up, and it would all be cushy, And obviously I started growing, and it just wasn't going to happen for me, and sort of gave up the hope of being a jockey quite young, I suppose, really, and sort of went and did a lot of other sports like rugby and tennis predominantly. But then you get to that sort of age and you start to think, what do I want to do with my career, sort of thing. And racing was something that stood out to me, and I sort of thought, what do I want to do? My parents aren't trainers, so it's financially quite hard to get into training if you're not sort of either backed or inheriting a training facility. So I looked at sort of the racecourse side, and a good family friend of ours is a clerk and helped me out, and I did quite a bit of shadowing when I was quite young. I think I was only about 17, and it all just sort of grew from there, to be honest. And the one thing with clerks is it's quite an individual job, because you're the only person that does it at your racecourse. But because it is quite niche, we all sort of look out for each other. And I basically just got a phone call the one day, and someone just said, sort of, there's a job going as a trainee clerk, would you be interested? It all sort of spiraled from there. I actually didn't get that job, but they sort of created one for me, to sort of work around the country rather than just a specific race course. And I went and did that for a year, and here we are now.
Where was the first race course you worked at? Was it Newcastle?
So I went to Southall to start with, and we put the Topeta track down when I was there. So that used to be Fibre Sandy all-weather circles, and we put it to Topeta. So that was a big eye-opener, because, growing up, national hunt racing was sort of the bread and butter for me. And then I went to all-weather racing 4 days a week, which I thought I'd absolutely detest, but I actually got really into it. And I think the fact that I sort of was there and learned so much so quickly from the likes of Michael Dickinson, who owns Topeta and obviously used to be a trainer, and it was just an unbelievable experience. And then I went up to Newcastle, where you had the mixture of both flat and jumps, and I spent a bit of time there. It was a really good time to be there. We had the all-weather finals day there, which is sort of the pinnacle of all-weather racing, and then the Ida Chase and lots of other nice races over jumps. So it was a really exciting time, and learned a lot from Eloise Quayle, who is Clerk there.
Yeah, amazing.
Is there a particular, in terms of going from like the turf to the all-weather and things like that, is the role completely different in terms of how you manage the course itself, or is it very similar?
Yeah, the background of the job's the exact same. The principle of clerking is the exact same. Mostly the only difference is that the all-weather is a synthetic surface, so you're not trying to make it grow, but you do still have to work it. And I'm by no means an expert on it. I wouldn't feel comfortable if someone just said to me, "Look, here's Wolverhampton Racecourse, go and run it," because I really don't know much about it. I know a sliver of what there is to know about synthetic surfaces. So it is very different in the way that, they still work incredibly hard, because they do race an awful lot normally, those race courses, but they're not cutting grass, they're not watering it and basically making something grow. So it is different on that front, but then they're still having to do all of the same admin side of the role and race day procedure side of the role.
Interesting. I was just thinking, when you're talking about your sort of journey, when you were sort of trainee, did you always, you always had aspirations? Did you to become sort of the lead clerk at a course? Is that sort of what you really wanted? Yeah,
so when I was a trainee clerk, I was shadowing fully trained clerks for the courses. So Paul Barker was my mentor when I was training up in the north, and yeah, you sort of always aspire to have somewhere that's sort of your own, I suppose. It was quite unique for me in the way that I didn't really know where that was, because I was basically always I was always sort of second to someone, sort of assisting them.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad it was, because it meant that I got to experience so many different race courses and sort of take the good, the bad and the ugly from all of them, to try and sort of conjure up my own style of clerking and my own sort of expectations of what I want to be at my race course, effectively. But yeah, just got incredibly lucky that so Sophie Candy, who was at Windsor Racecourse for for many years, left to join the BHA, and I basically went down to help out at Windsor and sort of just fell in love after a summer there with the place, and just decided it sort of felt like home, and luckily got offered the job full time there after sort of shadowing. George Hill was my mentor there, who is now Newbury's clerk of the course. Along the way, I've been helped by a lot of good people.
Yeah, it's amazing. You must have learned so much from them. And I mean, we love Windsor. I used to live there, and yeah, we've had many Monday nights there. So yeah, it's a beautiful place. How did you feel about when that opportunity came up to take the lead, like the lead clerk role? Like, how did you feel? Like, were you think you're ready for it, or were you just like excited just to jump into it and make it your own?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I was very fortunate. I want to have a very good relationship with Sophie Candy, so you know, she was always on the end of the phone if I needed her, because it does take time to sort of bed into a course. I think, you know, you can't expect just to go in there and change the world overnight, because at the end of the day, right, like Windsor's been racing since 1866, and
Yeah.
it'll be racing for a lot longer than I'm ever there. But look, yeah, a huge opportunity, obviously, and something I was really grateful for, and just wanted to sort of put everything I had into it at the time, I suppose.
Yeah, amazing. Should we get into talking of Windsor then? Should we get into the jumps then now?
Yeah, absolutely. As Matt said, living in Windsor, I enjoyed going to the flat racing all summer. But I'm an absolute avid jumps fan. So when I heard the jumps were coming back to Windsor, I was, absolutely delighted. It felt like a dream come true as a punter. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the timings. Were you there when that kind of decision was made? Were you involved in that decision, or did it kind of happen before you took over?
Yeah, so it was almost just rumours for a few years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was sort of there when the rumours got started. There was a lot of work going on behind the scenes, hence probably the fact there were rumours. And we were sort of developing it with the BHA and sort of coming to some form of agreement as to how we would be able to bring jump racing back, because it's not something that's really done, you know. Nottingham's a good example. They used to jump race, they're now flat racing, and I don't think there's any plans to bring jump racing back at Nottingham, and it's not something that's regularly done. So it took a lot of planning, and a huge amount of people were involved. You know, it was probably 2 years of planning really until we sort of got there. So yeah, I was very lucky that sort of 3.5, 4 years ago when I joined Windsor, that's when the planning really sort of started to take place. So I saw it all the way through, which was really nice.
Yeah, amazing. Nice to see it through, isn't it? Yeah.
Did you
almost
feel
have
like
to sell?
Go on, Duncan.
Sorry, Al. I was going to say, Charlie, do you almost have to kind of, when you're saying about planning, to get the jump season in there, is it almost kind of selling the dream to, I don't know how you kind of get that kind of approved? Like, how does it kind of, who do you have to go to get that kind of thing approved for the Windsor thing? Do you kind of say, this is the amount of money we're intending on bringing in based on these fixtures? If we get this, please give me like the fixtures to be able to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Work closely with the course inspectorate to sort of say, look, this is how we're going to design the course, and this is what it's going to look like, so on and so forth, and come to an agreement with them, because they have quite a lot of say in that as well. But then we put a proposal forward to the BHA about sort of prize money levels that we can sort of provide by bringing jump racing back, and what we're looking to do. So from the outset, we've been sort of very strict on the fact that we're looking to sort of provide attractive racing. We don't want to just run jump racing all winter, basically, just as a cash cow. We really want to sort of put on special days that are going to mean something to the racing industry. And then we sort of looked at tapping into people that we knew that would really sort of help Windsor out. So, for instance, Nicky Henderson, who, absolutely loves the course and would have had runners there in the 90s. And even before that, when he was working for Fred Archer, who worked for, I can't think, he would have been there as a young boy. So he was a big spokesman for us, and sort of wrote a bit into a sort of piece of work that we then handed to the BHA and said, look, this is our proposal, and a bit of toing and throwing, and then we got it across the line.
And in terms of the, you kind of mentioned this before, but in terms of the development or the proposal that was put forward, it wasn't reverting back to the original figure of 8 jumps course, which obviously we have for the flat in the summer, although we'll come on to it now being back to that case. But talk us through the kind of, what was the kind of reasoning or decision making factors around basically redesigning a complete new course shape for the jumps? That's interesting because I heard certain pundits even, and obviously they were probably misinformed. They might have been speculating, but essentially when just as they were previewing the jumps coming back and the track layout, they were sort of saying, well, the BHA won't sanction a figure of eights course again, as if for some reason that's unsafe, and maybe Fontwell was an absolute outlier, but it actually isn't as we've proven with it going back to a figure of eight, it isn't a safety concern. It was more actually protecting the ground for the summer. That makes sense. And then I suppose since the jumps came back last season in the kind of new, as you should call it, kidney bean configuration, there was a fair amount of sort of criticism on how the course rode or where the fences were positioned. I think there were some tweets along the way. I suppose as a clerk, how did you kind of deal with that? Is that something you sort of took head on, or did you feel it was like more of a personal thing? Or I suppose how did you cope with that and then bring us forward to a year later where we have now a different configuration of the course?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of sort of not disparaging comments. That's probably a bit strong, but sort of throwaway comments like that. And it's such a small sample size as well. I don't know why people are making those assumptions.
Yeah,
That's
for
fair.
sure.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. I've just got just one final question, just an observation from when I was at your first fixture this season, jumps fixture a couple of Sundays ago. Just it seemed to me that I don't know if this was flat hurdles and fences, but it did seem I got an impression that they were finishing quite strung out in some of the races. I don't know if that's an observation you shared, and if there's any sort of, I was trying to theorise what might be behind that, whether they're probably the jockeys maybe aren't as familiar with the course, maybe they're getting racing too far out. Because I didn't think the ground was particularly tested that day. I don't know if you had any views on that.
Mm. Mm. Interesting.
Absolutely. I think a few jockeys hopefully learned a few lessons from that.
Keep the handbrake on longer.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So Charlie, we're just going to finish with 5 quickfire questions, if that's all right with you. We do it with all of our guests. They're kind questions, don't worry. So let's start with, what's your favourite race in the fixture? Obviously, we're talking about Windsor, so yeah. Nice. And what's been your best moment as a clerk? I think we can all agree with that, being around the corner from Windsor Ale. What's your worst moment as a clerk so far? No, that's good. Shows a successful career so far, so that's great. What's the one bit of advice then, if you were, in your shoes a few years ago, that you would like to have been told when you were starting your journey as a trainee clerk and now lead clerk at a racecourse? What's the one bit of advice you give someone? Mm. Yeah.
Preach.
Yeah. Well said. And lastly, what's the one thing that you'd change about horse racing then? It's a big question, but maybe just the headlines. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, we spoke about that before, haven't we? Yeah. Well, thank you, Charlie. It's been a fascinating conversation. Really interesting. So
interesting.
we've had an hour of your time, and we couldn't thank you enough for being on the pods. Hopefully, we'll have you back soon, maybe in the future after the next round of jumps. See how they go. And good luck with everything, and thank you again for coming on to Tailed Off.
Thanks, Charlie.
Position. Any power at the last race down. Any power has gone, but in front of the last lens, Melody Light. The first time, they're running up towards the finish, and he's mistaken the winning post.